Hey guys, sorry for the delay. I was having a little trouble getting online this morning. We're here in New Hampshire, and we have a probably about an inch or so of snow outside. So it's one of those mornings that you went to bed with a little bit of a dusting, and you're waking up this morning, and there's snow on the ground. So the winter is upon us. We're gonna get maybe it'll last. Probably won't last till Christmas, but we'll see. Um, just trust you guys are waking up and having a really good day getting started. I'm a little discombobulated, but other than that, we'll be good. Hey, we had a great weekend in church this week. Um, awesome to just have a drive through. One of those drive throughs this morning. On Friday and Saturday. Just a huge amount of people coming into the building, making some new friends in our community. Reflected on Sunday morning. It was overall just a great weekend. I trust that you guys had a great weekend too. Can you believe today is December the 12th? And so just 2 weeks, and we're right in the middle of Christmas, so we're right here. We have been in a series called God's People Living Generously. And it's a theme on generosity that we have begun to just explore during this Advent season. And we began by looking at this model of generosity in the incarnation. Using a staircase, we looked at the incarnation itself, modeling for us the generosity of the Father, of the Son, of Mary, Joseph, shepherds, magi, each they brought money, they brought time, they brought their reputations, they brought their futures, they brought their life. God the Father gave his most cherished possession in his Son. All of which to just lay the foundation that everything behind this incarnation was God giving back to you and to me. And that is what he asks us to go out into the world, right? And to demonstrate that same level of concern for people. I used the text on Sunday just as a way, just to spur one another on to think a little bit more deeply about some of what the scriptures were saying. And in Philippians chapter 2, it says that it, it's yeah. Hold on one second. I'm just pulling up my Bible here. Yeah. So in Philippians chapter 2, there's this great text, and I'd like to read it for you because I think it demonstrates some of what we're sharing here now. It says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. See, this whole idea then of considering others, right? It says this is the very attitude that Jesus demonstrated. And in that, we begin to see here, for instance, it continues to go on, and it says, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature God, did not think equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. And what did God do for him? But God highly exalted him, gave him a name above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. So you could see that Jesus, in his incarnation, there was this sense of laying aside some of his glory, and he humbled himself. Think about it. God. And what we know about Jesus is Jesus was in the beginning with the Father. It was through him that all things were made. That's what it tells us in John chapter 1, in Hebrews chapter 1. These texts, they put forward the idea that Jesus was one of the agents that brought creation into being. And so consequently, it's saying that the one who created all things now humbles himself to be a part of this creation. And he becomes obedient to the will of his Father that brought him to the cross, where he paid for the sins of humanity, and then through his resurrection brings life to everyone who puts their faith in him. And so this is all of what we see going on now with Jesus, right? So it's a great way to look at this model of generosity and recognize in this incarnation, in this Advent season when we celebrate the birth of Jesus, it's not too far removed for us to think of it in terms of generosity. So what I'd like to do is continue our discussion. We looked at Luke chapter 16, and we looked at the opening parable, which ended with this line from Jesus saying, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And today, I'd like to continue that conversation by having you turn to Luke chapter 16, right? And if you would, we'll look at Luke chapter 16, and we'll pick it up at verse 10. And so here, well, I'll tell you, for the benefit of those who may be tuning in today and haven't had a chance to follow along, it's a short little parable, so I'll read it for us again this morning. All right? So it says, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. Right? So this is not a manager who seems to be on top of his game, right? It's just the opposite. And so it says, so the rich man calls him in and asks him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The manager said to him, what shall I do now? He says, my master is going to take away my job. And he says, I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too proud to beg. And then it's like this little light comes on. He goes, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their homes. See that line right there, welcoming me into your homes? That's the essence of what this particular parable is really all about. This parable right now is demonstrating how this dishonest manager is going to find himself being welcomed into other people's homes. He is using whatever leverage, whatever resources he has right now to better his standing, right? To make his life easier. And so when he brings in the debtors, of whom he has no idea how much they owe, which underscores again why he's such a poor manager. I mean, he's got this job to do and he's not really fulfilling it. And so he winds up giving a discount to all these debtors, and no doubt so that they would welcome him into their homes, right? Take care of him. So the strange thing is that the master actually commends the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. Isn't that interesting? Jesus now is adding his commentary to the parable that he just gave. And his commentary is one, it says, hey, look, when you look at the people of this world, in contrast to the people of the light, he says, the people of this world, they're using the things of this world, right? This worldly wealth in a way to better their positions. And he says, and they're more shrewd in that than are the people of the light. And so there's this distinction then now between how the people of this world and the people of the light are handling these worldly goods. And the one it's all about me, right? It's making sure that my position is a good one. But Jesus goes on, and then he says this in verse 9. He says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So unlike the people of this world, right, who are using to better their positions in the present, Jesus is telling us that we ought to be using worldly wealth, right, the resources of this world, with an eternal perspective. At the end of the day, it's not about just making your life better in the here and now. It's about making your life better in the one to come, to making certain that you'll be welcomed into those eternal dwellings. Because it is going to be a time when that worldly wealth, when those resources that you have now, they are going to be gone. It's not if, it's not a probability. No, it's a certainty. It is going to be gone. You cannot take it with you. And so suddenly now you begin to realize the frailty of this life. And if you've ever had the unfortunate experience of losing someone close to you, there is a finality to death that is hard to describe until you go through it yourself. We all know that death is final, but what it does to you on the inside, what you're cut off. There is this sting to our mortality, and yet sometimes we don't think about it enough to recognize that God is saying, no, I have come proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of heaven, so that you would have all that you need to go from this life into the one to come. Jesus has come to prepare us so that we would be welcomed into those eternal dwellings. And so this whole parable is really meant for you and me to be in a position to find that our futures are rendered certain, that they are secure. And so living your life with this sense of eternity is an important thing. Well, now, if you would, just go on, turn to the next few verses here in 10 to 12, because I'd like to talk a little bit more about this with you as we're continuing in our study in this theme of living generously. Jesus goes on now, and what he's going to do is he's going to give us some more insight into the parable that he had just given, right? So if at the bottom of the line, Jesus is saying, he says, look how the people of this world, look how this dishonest manager was shrewd enough to recognize that he had to do something so that his life, right, would be benefited, that his future would serve him well. Jesus saying, you're not looking far enough. You have to use your worldly wealth now to gain friends so that, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And the gaining of friends is just considering others, before yourselves. It's like what we read in Philippians 2, right? Jesus considered others and began to serve. Jesus' humility and his obedience, what was to be gained for Jesus? He laid down his life so that you and I would be the beneficiaries of that. And what he's asking us to do now is, as his representatives going into the world, is to demonstrate these kingdom values, and and that becomes part of this whole attitude that we have to enjoy them. It says God gives us every good and perfect gift, but we can't get so lost in those gifts that we forget there's going to be a day that we're going to stand before God and give an account for one's life. We can't get so lost in our stuff, because Jesus will tell us, what is it profit a man if he gains the whole world and he loses his soul? Which introduces the possibility that you could lose your soul, that you may not be welcomed into eternal dwellings at the end of this life. But the good news of the kingdom is that those who follow after Jesus, who put into practice his teachings, it says they will be welcomed. And that is what faith and hope is all about. That's what this Christian life is how it's supposed to be defined, by the way in which I am embracing the teachings of Jesus. So let's look at what Jesus goes on to say in verses 10 to 12. He says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will be dishonest with much. So here you have this contrast now, and the thought of being trustworthy is being placed in parallel to being dishonest. So Jesus now is moving from saying, hey, listen, use your material resources so that you could be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Now he talks about how is Jesus defining what it means to be trustworthy? What does a trustworthy manager look like? And he goes on to say in this one in verse 10 that this is really about character, isn't it? It's about a person who can be trusted with a little bit, he says, is also going to be trusted with much. Because if you're dishonest with a little, you're gonna be dishonest with much. And that is just underscoring again this idea of one's own faithfulness. You look at at the end of the day, when we stand before God, there is a moment when you read, like for instance in a few chapters in Luke chapter 19, Jesus will tell another story about a person who's shown himself to be trustworthy, and when he gets to heaven, he's going to hear the words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been trustworthy in small matters, and now I will put you in charge of many." That's what you want to hear. You want to hear God, commending the way in which we are handling ourselves, our resources, our time, right? All of those things in a way that is honoring him. And it's not just for a day and a week. It goes way beyond that, doesn't it? There are numerous passages about this, but one of which you could go all the way back to Matthew chapter 6, and one of the things here that we are told, right, is about Jesus is bringing up a number of really good teachings. And do you remember this one? When he says, again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago. This is Matthew 5, verse 33, right? So as we're talking about being trustworthy, Look at this passage here, Matthew 5 and verse 33 through 37. This is, I'm going to put this up so that you can take a look at it. So here, Jesus, this is the Sermon on the Mount, right? If you've been following along with us in the Gospel of Matthew, we've gone through some of these stories. This is where Jesus has begun to lay down some of the principles of what it means to be a part of the kingdom of heaven. So if you and I are going to be a part of this kingdom, notice what Jesus says here. He says, again, you've heard it said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oath that you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. See, these are all ways to just underscore that we were telling the truth, right? When you were a kid, you would engage sometime in this little, game where you said, well, I had my fingers crossed, so I don't have to, I have to fulfill what I said, right? Or have you ever noticed that when you adamantly say, look, I swear I'm telling the truth, or you invoke some kind of person or thing to just underscore that I'm telling the truth. Jesus is saying here is like, why do you engage in that? When the matter is pretty simple. Verse 37, he says, simply let your yes be yes and your no, no. Anything beyond this, he says, comes from the evil one. And what he's saying basically is we ought to be just men and women of integrity, that our yes ought to be yes, our no, no. And the reason why he says anything more of this is from the evil one is because we're always making room for the lie. So unless I really swear by something, then I'm not telling the truth. I have to put my hand on a Bible in order to tell the truth. I got to invoke some harm to some person, otherwise I'm not telling the truth. Now, what we hear from Jesus here is, no, your yes should be yes and your no, no. And that's one of the things that now all of a sudden you read when Jesus is talking about what makes a manager trustworthy. It's about character. It's saying that you can be trusted with a little bit. And if you can be trusted with a little, you'll be trusted with much. Very often, when you're younger, you want to go to the head of the class, right? You don't want to have to put in all this extra work. You don't want to have to go through all these experiences. It takes too long. I want to fast forward some of the lessons. But it doesn't work that way, does it? You need to get in some experience. You need to learn some things, and before you're going to be given much. Sometimes you give people huge responsibilities without having tested them, and it's not fair to them, and it's not fair to everyone underneath them. But in this situation here, it's saying, look, this is something that's true. You have to show yourself faithful in a little so that you will be given more. Because the reverse is true. That dishonesty that you demonstrate with a little is only going to be heightened with the dishonesty that you show with much. So just keep in mind now this idea, right, between the little and the much. Because when you get to verse 11 now, we're going back to Luke chapter 16, and he says, so if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Okay, so let me just deposit this thought with you today, and then we'll look at it tomorrow. So we have been looking at this contrast between little and much. But there's also, it's saying here, you have this worldly wealth in contrast to what? True riches. Do you see that? In this text now, it's saying the contrast between little and much, between worldly wealth and true riches. So if you're following along this argument here that Jesus is presenting, he's saying, if you have shown yourself faithful in handling little, you will be given much. And then in the very next verse, he talks about, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? So the contrast now is between worldly wealth and true riches, which also leads you to think that maybe in the economy of the way in which Jesus is looking at value, he's looking at the worldly wealth as being little and true riches as being much. Do you catch that? Because this is the argument that Jesus is beginning to unfold as a result of telling this parable. The parable is talking about being shrewd, right? Being insightful in the way in which we are discharging our resources. And he's saying, as the people of the light, I want you to discharge these resources with a view towards eternity. And I also want you to discharge these responsibilities in a trustworthy manner. Because if you can't be trusted with a little bit, why am I going to give you more? If you can't show yourself faithful with handling worldly wealth, then why am I going to give you true riches? We'll talk about what those true riches are tomorrow. So appreciate the time that we're spending this morning, and we'll unpack these verses a little bit more in this next coming days. So you go out, seize the day. Maybe if you're living in New Hampshire, you might have to seize a shovel. But go out, seize the day, remembering that God is good all the time, and we'll spend some more time this week, Lord willing, taking a look at this parable on generosity. God bless you, my friends.